This machine should be fairly familiar to a lot of you. It's called the chop saw or the miter saw, and these are found more commonly in people's homes, unlike a lot of the other larger equipment that we're covering. This particular model is a 12-inch, so it's a 12-inch blade, and it's a slider, which means I can slide and cut a much wider piece than on other chop saws. Now, to turn that sliding feature off, because there are times where if I'm cutting a narrow board, I don't want to slide, I just want to cut straight down. Reach around the back, and in the back there's a little black knob, and you simply twist the knob, and now it doesn't slide, and I can use it as a non-sliding chop saw. Some of the other features is right here on top, you're going to see a switch. That turns on an LED light. So if I push the switch, now there's a light on. And the idea of that is when I come down, you can see that the guard slips out of the way, and now it shows me exactly by the shadow of the blade where the blade's going to cut, which is very useful. So whenever I need a certain amount, if I have a line that I'm trying to get on there, I don't actually have to touch the board. I can just see where the shadow of the blade's going to cut, and I'm going to be good every time. Some of the other features on here, this is your fence. Everything has to be pushed against the fence. The blade is spinning this direction, and if I have a gap and I try to cut, it's going to slam the board back against the fence. That's how you break the fence. Now, it's called a miter saw because it can cut miters. The two kinds of cuts that this saw can make is a cross cut, which cuts straight across the grain, and that's at 0 degrees. I can see it right here on the side. And it makes a miter cut, which is anything other than 0 degrees. So if I turn this, now I'm at 30 degrees, that's a miter cut. Most of our miters are going to be at 45 degrees, but it depends on what you're doing. Now, the saw has little cutouts in the front. It's called a positive stop. So if I press the button in the front, this model is push this button to release, and I let go of the button and just keep pushing, you can hear it click in. It clicks into one of those notches, and I know that that's at 15 or 22.5 or 30 degrees or whatever it's saying here, and it doesn't move. Lock it into place, and I'm ready to make a miter cut. This particular setup also has a saw gear mechanism that will allow you to cut certain lengths. Turn it on right there, and it's exactly like the upcut saw setup. So if I want 40 inches, 4-0 start. If I want 30.5, 30.5 start, and I can also put in fractions as I've shown you before. The saw can cross-cut, but you never want to rip. Taking the board and turning it this way to rip with the grain is going to give you a kickback almost every single time. The blade is not ground to rip, and you're not meant to do it. It's going to kick back. So never rip on a chop saw, on a miter saw. Also, when you're cutting to get the best results, you want to turn on the saw and let it speed up fully. Let the blade come to a complete top speed. That takes maybe 2 seconds, barely 2 seconds. And as you're cutting, cut nice and slowly. So as I bring it down, I can see from the shadow where I'm going to cut, turn it on, let it speed up, cut slow. So I can show you right there, we get a nice smooth cut. If I go quickly, you can see that that's very chewed up. The blade is now, I'm going so fast that it grabs wood and rips it out, as opposed to the other side, which makes it nice and smooth. So make sure to take your time on every cut. Also, if you find a piece of wood that is badly twisted, in other words, when I set it on something flat, it wobbles back and forth, think twice before you cut it. A very likely a good cause of a kickback is the board is twisting. So in other words, I get down to cut and it will shift, it'll move. And once that happens, it grabs the board and wants to throw it back. The most common reason for a kickback is going too quickly. Again, for that same reason I showed you, because you're not allowing it to slice the wood like it's meant to do. It grabs and rips it out. And when you cut very quickly, it's trying to push the board away. Also, when you cut, make sure you got a hand on it. If it's this side, I have my left hand on and I'm cutting. If you want to cut on this side, that's fine. Hold it with your right and cut with your left. But you don't ever want to twist your hands, cross them over, and cut along this way. Bad form, I can't see what I'm doing, and my arms get in my own way. I can't use it correctly. So make sure to keep your arms separated depending on which side you're using. As I mentioned before, this is the sliding saw, so it can cut a much wider piece. This one is set to do up to 16 inches wide. So if I do need to cut a wide piece, do I slide towards me or do I slide away from me while cutting? So here's the way that it should be set up. Slide towards you, cut down, and then cut pushing away from you. So let me demonstrate here, turn it on, and then back up. Okay? So whenever you're using a sliding saw, you want to be cutting away from you. If I cut towards me, the blade is trying to run at me already, and it ends up jerking quickly because I'm pulling it in the direction it already wants to go. This other saw is a little bit of a different setup. It's not a slider, but it just is a regular chop saw made by the same company. Now, different companies make different chop saws. Make sure you understand which parts go with which ones. But it does have similar parts in this case with the light on top. Of course, the fence, we have our table and everything else. Now, this also has a sliding stop, okay? And I'll show you how to read the sliding stop as we're going. Here's how you read the sliding stop. You can see right here on the plastic, there's a little hash mark, a very thin hairline. That's the dimension. That's what you actually are lining up with the numbers. It's not the edge of the plastic. So if I want about 18, make sure it's lining up with the 18-inch mark, and then tighten it down. You don't have to go super tight, but you need it snug, because if you take a piece of wood and slide it in and hit this too hard, it will move down. Slowly but surely, this will shift down little by little, and then the distance between your mark and the blade gets greater. So make sure to be gentle when you slide your wood up against it, but also remember, this is the line you're going for, regardless of whether you're on the left side of the blade or the right side of the blade. Use this line. Now let's show you a couple of cuts on the chop saw. First of all, if you have a long strip, let's say you're cutting multiple lengths of board, go ahead and lay it in here. We can make a cut, bring it down and make another cut, and continue that until I run out of wood. Now I'm just freehand cutting here. I don't have a measurement. If you want to, say, trim the ends of multiple pieces, as long as they're short, they're not huge, you can go ahead and cut multiple pieces. Cut nice and slow and you get a nice cut. If I am using the gauge and I'm cutting something that it can't get, I can only get to about 12.5 inches here, all you got to do is use this 10-inch spacer. So let's say I wanted 8 inches. Let me set it to now 18 right there. I put my 10-inch spacer, and now that I've got my 3 good ends, I put all 3 against there, or 1 or 2 boards or whatever you've got. Now I can cut, and that gives me a perfect 8 inches. So depending on your setup, this will come in very handy. Also, we can do miter cuts. You're going to get a slightly bigger board. We just take the stop out of the way, and on this machine you need to squeeze underneath. On the first machine I push on top with my thumb. This you squeeze with your trigger finger and move it over to whatever you want and lock it down. Now with miter joints, it's the same cut, so I can cut this way and that's fine. However, now that I've tilted it to 45 degrees, the blade is going to want to push the board this way, because now I'm not going perpendicular to my fence, I'm at an angle. So it's going to want to slide. So whenever you do a miter, make sure to hold it down a little bit tighter, because if I don't, it's going to slowly slide away from the blade as you're cutting and you get a bad cut. So hold it tight. Nice and slow and even, and you'll get a nice miter after that. And the last thing I wanted to mention is, as you're cutting boards, you've gone through your squaring procedure. So you've joined in an edge, you've cut it to width, now you come to the chop saw for the last 2 steps of squaring a board. We need to trim off the ends. So what we have to do here is make sure, when I cut this on the upcut saw, the very first cut to get it to a rough length, neither end is square. They're not square because the board didn't have a good edge. So step 3 of the squaring procedure is trim off an end, just a little. So I'm just going to take off a blade width. Now I use that nice square end, slide it down to my stop or whatever line I have on here to trim the other end off to the right length. Now I have all 4 edges that are cut. I have both ends that are square. Now you have a nice square flat board.